be the default position. I think the news would be players who decide to go to this White House. I want to be very clear about something. It has nothing to do with party affiliation or political leaning. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Wouldn't say this if it were Reagan or H.W. Bush or W. Bush, who was very unpopular, or any, Clinton who had trouble, or Obama who was attacked by partisan politics, etc. I'm not talking about anyone like that. I'm talking about a White House that is under ongoing criminal investigation by the FBI, where top Trump aides have been indicted and pled guilty to lying to the FBI with respect to collusion with a hostile foreign power, that is Russia, to influence our election. This is, to say the least, highly unusual, and I think disqualifying in terms of normalizing this presidency or the White House. Again, it has nothing to do with politics, which way you lean, right or left. To say nothing of comments that are also socially disqualifying, like making a moral equivalency between white supremacists and their protesters. I think that the assumed position, in polite society would be, no, of course you don't visit that White House. If you do visit the White House, I believe that is the story.
Well, to me, what I appreciated was what I heard from Malcolm Jenkins. He talked about, it's not like it's a meeting or anything like that, because if it's a meeting, then I'm not going to hold it against anybody for deciding to go and sit down. If you have an opportunity to sit down with the leader of the free world, who obviously has the power to make a difference if he is so interested and willing to do so. If you believe that there's somehow, some way you can draw his attention into the desolate and disenfranchised and help millions of Americans in this country, you think you're somebody that's able to pull that off, and he gives you the time to make a convincing case, then I don't have a problem with it. I think the problem with it, and I think Malcolm Jenkins pointed to that, is that, showing up to the White House for a celebration, or when Steve Harvey came and went to the Trump Towers, or when Jim Brown and Ray Lewis and guys did such a thing. I think the problem was they went through those golden elevators inside the Trump Plaza. You didn't see them at the White House. And you kind of wondered what was being discussed, what was being broached. And even though I have no doubt that their intentions were honorable, the president, it appears, gave every indication that it was nothing more than a prop, to give the impression that he was willing to address issues. Some would argue that is just completely false, that he's not trying to do that at all. He's not trying to do what he tried to give the impression that he was doing. But ultimately, what it comes down to is this. You're a Super Bowl champion. You have the right to celebrate in the manner that you choose. You're not obligated to go to the White House. It's perfectly within your right not to. And I love the fact that it seems to me that the players and professional athletes and organizations who have refrained or given the impression they're willing to refrain from going to the White House, they're not doing it for political reasons. They're doing it because of an individual that they believe has presented himself in such a fashion that he's not interested in any way in where their interest lies, and they consider him divisive. And if that's the reason for it, then I think that we have to respect that and applaud it, because they're not going about parties. They're not going about politics. They're looking at the individual. And if you're looking at the individual, you have a problem with him. I don't see that there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah, I don't begrudge any of these players their denial of a potential invitation to the White House. And I don't actually even begrudge any of these players their desire to not visit this president in particular. And here's why: because President Trump has put himself on opposite sides of issues from specifically National Football League players on various occasions. And we know there's been insults lodged. There has been, criticism specifically of some of their protests, and that's fine. And if any player looks at that and goes, you know what, this isn't a place for me, I understand. And like you, Stephen A., I continue to be impressed with Malcolm Jenkins at every turn. His explanation, I think, is the one to listen to. His reasoning, to me, carries the most weight. He says specifically, I don't begrudge anybody else's decision to go. And that leads me to my disagreement with you, Max, and it's one that we've had consistently. Although I don't begrudge these players saying they don't want to go, I would never begrudge a player who says he wants to go. It's an individual choice and an individual decision. And you say it's not about politics. What I think you're mixing up, Max, is the idea that partisanship and politics are the same thing. And for that matter, I think you've done it as well, Stephen A. I accept that it's not a left-right thing. But when you start invoking things, Max, like FBI investigations and Russian participation in elections, you're talking about politics. And the bottom line is, for a great many people in this country, and I would assume a great many NFL players, politics is not the thing that defines them in life. It's not the thing they wake up every day reading first, thinking about first, and defining themselves by. And after winning the Super Bowl, if they want to be honored at the nation's most, esteemed house, the White House, and they want to stand before the President of the United States, and they want to experience that, I would never begrudge them that because of politics.
I think that's well said. Will, I think that's well said. I'd like to respond this way. I think my bigger point really is, when you see, let's just talk in plain English, when you see authoritarian impulses in a leader, and when I say it's not politics left or right, I mean, if Hugo Chavez or someone like that were running as a Democrat and won the White House, I would be saying the exact same thing that I'm saying about Trump. Look, authoritarians everywhere, Erdogan in Turkey, Putin in Russia, Trump in the United States, rely on civic ignorance to normalize their behavior. And when you discredit the FBI, the intelligence community, when there is the strong appearance of obstruction of justice into interference from the White House, when you discredit the free press, etc., I think you're showing strong tendencies and giving out strong signals that people who are more civically minded will resist, and those who aren't may normalize through what you're saying, Will, which is, look, this isn't on the top of everyone's mind. And what I think is that is the responsibility of people who talk about this and know about it to say, even if it doesn't seem like it's important to you, these are very important things, and this behavior shouldn't be normalized.
Yeah, but Max, you're saying it's important, and I totally understand your point. If we're sitting up here, Will's on national TV, I'm on national TV, and you're sitting there and you're talking about what we're talking about and what we should put out there in the mind's eye, I can respect that. But I think, and Will, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what I think Will is alluding to is that not only is it not at the top of people's minds, they may not know about all of that stuff. They may pay no attention to it whatsoever. You might watch a whole bunch of news reports. You might read a whole bunch of papers and go to Politico and Beyond and whatever else it is that you read, and you might know what exactly is going on as it pertains to the numerous reports that have been out there about the Russian investigation, the FBI, the list goes on and on. But you have professional athletes who may have no clue about that whatsoever. And so if they don't know about that stuff and they're not paying attention to that stuff, I don't know if we can hold them accountable for that. What we can hold them accountable for is if they what we can hold them accountable for is if they're watching the individual and they're seeing some of the rhetoric that he spews and they're seeing his tweets and they find it offensive. I can understand that because that's easy to know. The stuff that you're talking about, they might not be paying attention to that.
Well, wait, one thing I just want to mention, Max, and then you can respond to all of them. Do you look at if these players go, they're endorsing the president? Do you think that's what's happening?
They're lending, not necessarily, but they are lending a sense of normalcy to something that is highly abnormal. And I think that's dangerous. And Stephen A., to your point, I see what you mean about the kind of outrage that can be engendered or offense that can be taken to some of his tweets, et cetera, or some of the statements that seem socially insensitive and divisive, et cetera. And I agree with that, too. But I'm also saying that as far as the other things are concerned, that you're saying are maybe too nuanced or too in the weeds for many, at this point, I and others are saying ignorance is no longer an excuse. Very important, scary, and dangerous things are happening that have not happened in other administrations. This is not normal, and any signal that we can send, and here we are in the sports world, we're opinions makers, etc., and it's incumbent upon us to let athletes know. If it's not normal, it's not okay.
If I haven't given you enough to disagree with at this point, Max, let me do the trick with my final thing here, I guess. Molly, to answer your question whether or not it's an endorsement, I'll tell you this. I did not, as I've stated on this program numerous times, vote for this president, endorse this president, agree with many of his policies. I would go to the White House. I would accept this honor. I would enjoy the experience, and I would not consider it an endorsement of the president, nor would I think it's normalizing anything that's happened over the last 3 years. And I would honestly think that, well, I can't speak for how many people agree with me, but I bet I'm not alone.
Yeah, for many, I think it's bigger than the president. Yep, go ahead, Stephen A.
And I would not, because I am ashamed at how he has conducted himself as a leader and a statesman. I'm not getting into the weeds of his policies and stuff like that. I think we all need to become more knowledgeable about the exact job that he's doing. But in terms of their representation, the embodiment of the presidency and what it is supposed to exude, I have been ashamed of how he has conducted himself. And because of that, I don't think he could be trusted in that regard. And I would not show up at the White House.
Differing opinions, but you all make very strong arguments. We will leave it there, gentlemen. The Eagles celebrating their Super Bowl title with the Heroes Parade in Philly today, but find out what will keep them from having the same